Hello, and welcome to Message in the Middle with Marianne. We all know that life is hard, right? It's messy, it's unpredictable, but it can be wonderful all at the same time. My hope is that we can take a deep dive into self-development topics and explore life's lessons through book clubs, conversations, and interviews. And together, we can uncover the lessons that others have already learned to help us navigate this crazy, wonderful ride called life. Hello and welcome to Message in the Middle. I'm your host, Marianne, and before we get started, I just want to say welcome to those of you that are new here, and thank you to those of you who have been coming back week after week. I'm so happy you've chosen to spend some of your precious time with me, and especially glad you chose to tune into this episode because I know many of you, like me, have felt that quiet tug, the one that says something doesn't quite fit anymore, isn't quite right, but you're not sure exactly what doesn't fit or what's driving that feeling or if that feeling's even real. Well, we're going to explore all of that today. And joining me is a guest with a pretty unique but insightful background, Toni LaMotta. And Toni spent 16 years living under a vow of obedience as a Catholic nun, an experience that gave her a deep understanding of authority, surrender, and what happens when our own voices slowly fade into the background, completely deprioritized or even forgotten. Today, Toni's a highly regarded spiritual coach, teacher, and internationally acclaimed speaker who's helped hundreds reclaim themselves. She holds a doctorate in religious studies, a Doctor of Divinity degree, and 3 master's degrees in pastoral ministry, adult education, and mathematics. Drawing on decades of experience and training in multiple evidence-based methodologies, Toni developed a 6-pillar system that helps people move from fear-driven decision-making to aligned, confident action. In this conversation, I'll ask Toni to share practical tools to transform fear into clarity, explain why our past patterns aren't mistakes, but instead are information, and talk to us about reconnecting to our inner guidance. Toni, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Marianne. It's great to be here.
Well, I have to start at the spot that leaves me the most curious. And we were just about to talk about it when we weren't recording. And I said, wait, I'm going to ask you that on the show. So we started recording, but I have to ask about being a nun. So what led you to be a nun and stay in that for 16 years? And I guess what led you out of it?
Oh, that's a long story, but we'll get it brief here. Probably when I was like 5 or 6 years old, I had a mystical kind of experience. I don't know if I really had it or if I remembered it or dreamt it, but I remember like being in New York. I was from New York at the time. I saw myself standing on top of one of the largest buildings and letting people know that they were loved by God. I know I was a real precocious little kid. And I always felt called to be a priest. And in the Catholic Church, that's obviously,
Yeah.
it still hasn't happened. Don't know if it will.
Yeah.
But so I did what the best I could do. And I actually thought the only way to be holy and to follow this was to become a nun. And so that's the highest reason. The other reason that I discovered years later is that I come from an Italian background where men tell women to jump and ask how high on the way up. And so it was, basically from one patriarchal society to another. But I think I was escaping married life, even though, my family was very loving. There were lots of very good qualities there too. But I think there was a mixed bag in there. But I loved being in the convent, and it was a very special. I actually entered the community that I had gone to high school with, and they were the most supportive. It was called Divine Compassion, and just the name alone still really speaks to my soul. And they a very beautiful group of women. But eventually, as the Catholic Church changed, I no longer could feel like I was representing something that I didn't totally believe, which
Hmm.
is partly why I left. And the other reason I left is I was in a very unique position. I've had a lot of unique jobs. I was an associate pastor in a Catholic church. Uh, Actually, they called me the pastoral associate because you couldn't be an associate pastor and be a woman. Uh, Interesting stuff.
Yeah,
And,
so interesting.
so I left there, but that particular church that I was in, there were some very strong married couples that I could see having all kinds of challenges, but I watched the strength of their marriage, and so I decided that I wanted to leave to get married. And to this day, I still haven't been, which is very interesting. However, you asked for the story. I don't usually tell that, Marianne. But it's something that was a very interesting, very special part of my life. I mean, I really learned to pray and go deep, and I love the charism of compassion. It's still important to me.
Hmm. That's so interesting. So, I was going to follow up and ask you if there were signs along the way that this wasn't the right calling for you. But I guess I will still ask that. But it sounds like it felt like the right calling until it wasn't.
It exactly. It wasn't, there were no, I guess I kind of knew maybe 5 years before I left, there was a little bit of a message. But what happened, I mean, we talk about how I shut down because the vow of obedience tells you not to trust yourself,
Mm,
at least as I interpreted it. It's like somebody outside you knows better and you should listen. And so when I got those tugs, I didn't pay attention to
mm,
them. And I eventually silenced my inner voice. And it was really it was years after when I started reading spiritual books and attending workshops. And there were many different workshops, which I'm now looking at, like the six that were major in my life, and that's what I'm now teaching. Because when I looked at, like, how did I get from not listening to listening,
yeah.
and that's how I did it, and therefore it's what I'm doing with other people. But it was gradual. It wasn't like one day I discovered. And I remember being with a therapist who used to say to me, "Let's talk about your leaving." And I'm like, "No, no, no, we're not talking about that." And one day I walked into her office and said, "When I leave." And she was like, "What?" And so, it kind of happened gradually, but there it was. There was no one instance, really,
It
you
it's
know.
so interesting that the words that you use to explain the vow of obedience, I guess I had never really thought about what it's like for a parent-child relationship, but the way you described it made me think the same thing. So, in that vow of obedience, you said we're taught to listen to something outside of ourselves or someone or an entity. And gosh, that's sort of the parent child relationship too. So, right from the time we're young, we're sort of being trained to not listen to ourselves.
That's really insightful because when I, began doing some of these podcasts and giving talks, I structured it around the vows we all take.
Hmm.
And what I see is exactly that. Many children just feel like my parents know, and they go to a corporate world and the boss knows or someone else knows, and they don't trust themselves, or they they get into people pleasing, and so everybody else comes before them. I mean, so almost everyone that I know of, I haven't met anybody who, like, really, well, I shouldn't say that. I did study with a woman named Sonia Choquette, who is an intuitive, who grew up with a family who told her to trust her inner voice. She's probably the only one I ever heard that has done that. Even most little children that are intuitive are told to shut that down.
Yeah.
But it is true that we all grow up not trusting that voice. And it takes a while to learn and to really, so many people will say, "Oh, I knew I shouldn't have done that."
Yeah.
Or "I should have never gotten married. I should have never taken that job. I knew it wasn't right." I mean, we know we have within us that inner knowing. I call it the inner compass.
Yeah.
And it's even stronger than intuition. It's like something in us knows exactly what needs to happen. And we've got to learn to listen. Mhm.
Well, let's talk about that because I know just from doing research on you that I know you believe, and we just talked about it being something that we're sort of all born with. We'll say all, I'm sure there's exceptions, but we're all born with. But many, if not most of us, lose it along the way or lose connection to it. So, what do you see in the work you've been doing, the studies that you've done, all your experience? What are some of the best ways to start reconnecting back to it again?
Well, there are a number of things that I talk about. And one of them is journaling itself. But I do a particular type of journaling that's called the intensive journal, which is not just recording your thoughts. It is literally looking at what your life wants to become. And there are exercises where you can literally dialogue with people from your past, or you can actually record different events in your body and start listening to your body and have your body speak to you. And our body always knows. It's amazing. So there are lots of different journal techniques where it's like, people call it automatic writing. Something within you writes the answer when you ask a question, and you can find the answer that way. Another thing that I love working with is spirit guides and angels. And, it took a while to even accept that in my life because that was not something part of my religious background. But this woman I mentioned, Sonia Choquette, taught us a simple thing that I can tell all your audience to start doing is to notice the difference between the voice of your spirit and what Sonia calls your barking dog.
Hmm.
And it's a wonderful analogy because it's very simple. People get it. And she actually suggests that you name both of them. When it's spirit speaking, you have peace, you have joy, you have calm. It's usually quiet. And when it's that barking dog, it's like, "Why are you doing this? You shouldn't do that. What's going to happen if, that kind of thing." And so I just encourage people when I first work with them to just start noticing and listen to those voices. And then when you hear spirit voice in you, literally speak it out loud and say, "My guidance is telling me this."
Hmm.
And the more you acknowledge it, the more it speaks. Quite interesting. So that's a very simple but a profound technique. And the other one is very somatic too. I do an exercise that I learned from one of my teachers as well. I've had some wonderful teachers over the years, a man named Russ Hudson. I don't know if you know the Enneagram at all.
I do, yes.
Well, and I deeply studied the Enneagram and still do. And Russ teaches a 7-minute practice. And basically, it's starting your day by 2 minutes of watching your breath and your sensations. So getting very grounded in your body. And then once you do that, your heart opens up. It's like, what are you feeling? How are you expressing what's going on? How are you connecting to others? And you feel that for 2 minutes again. And then you go to your head. And at this time, the barking dog gets quiet. And you really can hear the head is filled with possibilities and visions and ideas. And you can spend 2 minutes there and then spend a minute just connecting the three. It's a very simple and a very profound practice. And it puts you in the moment, which is the key spiritual teaching of every spiritual practice out there is living in the now. So I do it sometimes multiple times a day and not necessarily 7 minutes, but even just like, what am I feeling right now? Where is my sensation? Where is my body? It brings you back to the moment. It's profound.
Yeah. I think sometimes when you were just starting out, like I think some of the things that I did when just trying to be more present, they're so silly and so simple, but they work. Things like just as an example, if you're walking down the road and you're used to walking down the road and you never pay attention, all of a sudden force yourself to name the numbers on the houses or, the color of the mailbox or find triangles. I don't know, I'm making this up right now, but any little thing like that that really makes you suddenly be in it in the moment. And you could do that anywhere, anytime, whatever you're doing. Just pick something random that makes you look for something, and it forces your brain to be in that spot in that moment. They're silly. They're really silly, but you can start training yourself with these little things.
One of my favorite practices, and I don't do it often enough, is like literally when I finish one activity, whatever it is I'm doing, to stop and say, what should I do next? What's next? And that's a way of tapping into your inner compass. And sometimes I get go for a drink of water, or sometimes you get something or call so and so, and it's like usually profound. When you call them, you find out they've just been in the hospital, or you find out all kinds of things. And when I do that, there was a time in my life where I was doing that every single activity. So I'm glad I'm saying that today. It'll remind myself to do it, because it's profound, and it's the opportunity to live like now, and to also to be asking for that guidance. And
Mm,
the more we ask, the more we receive, and the more we acknowledge it and say thank you when you get it.
yeah.
That's the second practice I do when people start coaching with me, is ask them to start noticing when you are being guided, and to literally one of my new coaches has a notebook. Says, I write it down and the notebook's getting full. It's like I'm really learning things, and we've always been hearing them. We just ignore them most of the
Yeah.
time. So
Yeah.
it's just as you said, they seem silly, but they're simple practices. And one of the guides that I work with are what they call the joy guides. And a joy guide is simply someone who reminds you to laugh, or
Mm.
someone who brings you surprises. And so I do practice that every morning. I wake up and say, hey, joy guides, I want you on the ball today. I need to have fun. And
I think I'm going to steal that one from you, Toni.
really do. I mean, we all have a joy guide, so I've even named mine. But you can play with it, and that's what it is. It's playing with it and make it fun. So many people think it's like so serious, and many of the podcasts have said to me, like, "What would you tell our listeners that they need to do?" And I'm like, "Lighten up. That's part of it." When we do is when we can hear.
Yeah.
It's when we get serious that we go into the shoulds and the what ifs and the overthinking. We get so much in the head that's not the head that I was talking about, the clear head. That barking dog takes over.
It's so wild that you just said that, because before I sort of ventured into doing some of this stuff and doing some of the work that goes with it, you could say that I'm very serious, always very serious. Some might even say a little tightly wound. And I think unraveling some of that, unlearning some of that, that's what part of the big shift. So yeah, I totally get that. Get rid of some of the seriousness. I want to ask you about trusting yourself, because as we talk about sort of unlearning those messages of not listening to ourselves, and we start tapping into trying to listen to ourselves, what do you say to the person listening that says, oh, when I listen to myself, I always pick the wrong guy, or I, pick the wrong job, or I make bad decisions with money, or whatever it is? What do you say to that person that's sort of afraid to trust themselves because they've had such bad experiences?
That's a really good question. And I think that part of it is, what are they listening to when they're doing that? Usually listening to fleeting emotions rather than the body. And this is interesting. It's, for example, I had a client who came to me who said, I'm thinking of leaving my job and moving, and I'm afraid to make the wrong decision because I make the wrong decisions a lot. So I said, all right, let's talk about leaving your job. How does that feel? And he said, oh my God, my stomach gets tight, my head hurts. And I said, trust that. And what about moving? He said, I feel this calm and this peace. And it's the absolute that right thing. I said, very simple. And so when people have been making the wrong decisions, they're using the wrong voice. They're listening to the fear. And like, I better get married to this man because there's probably not going to be another one after that. That's what happens. Or this job, looks good and I need the money right now. It's like it's fear-based rather than love-based. And so it's tuning in. Awareness is really the first step, but really tuning in and saying, where are my decisions coming from? And the three centers is my gut, is my heart, is my head. Are they all in sync? If you're simply using one of those, you're missing out.
That's good.
So I think it's a matter, and it takes,
Practice.
that's why there are coaches in the
Yeah.
world. We all not to tell you, I say to my clients, actually, my clients say to me, we love the fact that you don't ever tell us what to do. And it's like, it's not, you don't want to replace one voice with another. You want someone to walk with you, to hold your hand and say, yes, you're on the
Yeah.
right path.
I love that.
I had a coaching call last night, and the person, she described something that she went through, and she said, everybody kept saying to me, you shouldn't be doing that. And I said, and what did you do? And she said, I decided it was exactly what I needed to do. And I'm like, yay. Trust yourself. That's what's going on. It's like all those voices out there are gonna lead you in all kinds of directions. But and she laughed and she said, I did know. And I knew that that's what I needed to do. And, this is how it worked out. And it wasn't easy. The decision she made was a challenging one, but she felt right about it. And I just applauded her and just, continue. And that's my job. I just hold the space to help somebody be able to say, yes, this is my guidance.
I think also one of the things that you said when we were, I think, offline was that you work with more mature coachees, I guess, or clients. And to me, that helps because I certainly feel at this age, I'm 57, that my ability to say, who cares what anyone else thinks? This is what I want is so much higher than my ability to do that when I was, say, 30 or 20 or whatever, right? I mean, sure, I'm human and I still sometimes like, what if, or what are they going to think? That for me, I don't know if that'll ever go away, but I can tell you it's a million times better than it was 20 years ago. So I imagine that helps as well.
Well, we all want to belong. We want to feel like, and we want to listen. And, it's an interesting point. I don't ever say to people, don't listen to anybody else. We are not, we're not here to be alone. We're really meant to be interdependent. So there's a balance between good discernment,
Yeah.
checking it out. And I do that. We mentioned the Enneagram, and I'm an Enneagram. I lead with point 7. And 7 are the joy people of the world. We bring enthusiasm and joy, which is lovely, but we live in the future and can't stay with one thing at a time, which is why the presence practice is so important to me. But it's I don't look for the negative. I'm always seeing the positive. So when I'm making a decision now, I call my friends who are sixes and say to them, what do you see here? Check this out. Make sure you know this. And it's very helpful. I mean, I laugh because I would never have thought of that. I mean,
Yeah.
don't you're telling me all the negative things that could happen. But we need that. We need to balance each other. And that's why I work primarily with people who are sixes and nines, because they're the ones who forget themselves and worry about everything else. And I'm just the opposite. So we balance each other.
I love that. I love that. I want to talk about past experiences a little bit. I said in the lead in to our conversation that I know you talk about the fact that we shouldn't take our past or the experience of the past, even the ones that we might say are negative or, where our challenges were, or we made the wrong choices, and use them as failures or consider them failures. Instead, you say they should inform us. They are just information. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, two things come to my mind when you bring that up. One is a quote that I don't remember where I heard from, so I can't give the credit, but it's life is not happening to us, it's happening for us.
Yeah.
And just if people just listen to that one phrase and live by it, it changes everything.
Yeah.
Because I'll give you an example. I recently, in the last couple of months, fell and broke my ankle
Oh,
and in four places. It was one of the most painful things and a challenge. But while I was lying on the floor, it's going to sound weird, and in the most awful pain I've ever had, the thought went through my head, I wonder what the good here is. I wonder what the gift here is. And I laughed because I said, oh, I do take my own advice. Look at this. But I invite people to always say, if life is for us, why is this happen? Why did that quote failure happen? And failure, by the way, the story of Thomas Edison, it was 1,000 tries before he figured out how to do the electric light bulb. So nothing's a failure. It's just a learning opportunity to say, okay, that didn't work. Now what? What can I do?
yes.
And then one of the processes that I teach is something called the quantum living process. And I didn't create it, but it takes a look at anything that is a trigger in our life, anything disturbing us, anything we say shouldn't be happening or seems like a failure, and when you learn the process, it's more than just hearing it once, but the process says stop and say, what were the predominant feelings and what thinking are you thinking about yourself? What belief is that? And then go back and look at where did that come from? When did that happen? Usually in the first 5 years of our life.
Yeah.
And then there is a whole field of neuroplasticity where you can actually change memories, and you change the memory so that you don't change what happened, obviously, but you changed what you made it believe. And profound experiences happen when I see people. I've done this with over the last few months. 19 different groups have gone through this program. It's been exciting to watch people's childhood unraveling and really saying, oh my God, I've been living with this false belief
Yeah.
all my life. But it helps you then to say, nothing was an accident. None of my experiences aren't failures. Every experience has led me to where I am today. In fact, it was not until I've been coaching people for a while, but it's fairly recently that I picked up this inner compass coaching. And I had to look back at my life and say, how come I'm good at this? What made me good at it was that I was so bad at it for 16 years, you know, and I'm not going to call that a failure. Look at what it did. Look at how many lives can be changed because I've had that experience. So I just share that everything is for us, not happening to us.
One of my favorite sayings, Toni, is our mess becomes our message.
Oh,
And that's what I just heard you say, right? Your 16 years of not being true to yourself or having some choices that led you in a path that maybe wasn't the one you were supposed to be. Well, I would argue maybe you were supposed to be there because you learned a thing or two along the way that now you can help others with. But yeah, our mess becomes our message.
that is our message. That's great. I
Yeah.
used to hear someone say, "Your cross is your crown." So,
Yeah. Same thing.
right here.
I think it's the same. I've heard you say that we all have some inherent qualities that tend to get lost along the way. Give me a few examples of what you mean when you talk about that.
Well, I'm going to go back to the Enneagram again, and I can do it very quickly. I love the Enneagram because every single child is born divine, if you will. We have all the qualities within us. And then something happens, and it could be traumatic or it could be, they're all traumatic. It just, the various, and and so we then form our ego as a result of whatever happened. But the ego is constantly trying to get back to the main quality. So every personality type has one of the qualities. A two, for example, are the people pleasers of the world. They're there taking care of everyone else. They really, when they're healthy, are unconditional lovers. That's what it's about. You know, the threes are the people who like become chameleons and they can do whatever anybody thinks they're supposed to do. And they are the people who understand how to achieve in life. And they can teach the rest of us that. The fours teach people about the uniqueness of each individuals, and fives teach us about the inherent knowledge in all of us. And sixes are all about courage, even though they're the ones that lose their inner voice a lot. When they gain it, they are the most loyal and courageous people you'll ever meet. And, sevens, I mentioned enthusiasm and joy and vision are the gifts that we bring. And the eights bring power and vitality to everything. And nines are also a symbol of unity and love. So every single person has within it an amazing virtue, if you will, that they're here to bring to the world. And we're striving, our ego is trying to get us back there. And we kind of mess up how we do it, which is why a lot of people who learn the Enneagram, well, they hear the negatives.
Yeah.
And it's like, you've got to understand that every one of us has something as a gift to offer the world. And we need to focus on that gift. And then focus. I remember when I first started learning it, I thought, oh my God, I'm only seeing 1/9 of the world. And that's also helpful because then I don't go off alone. I recognize my need for others and it connects me and gives me community and all the other wonderful blessings that we get from one another.
It's so interesting when you talked about the dichotomy of the various numbers and where you fall on that scale. It made me think of something that I often say at work. It's that our greatest qualities are also typically our most challenging qualities. And just a real easy example I can play out for somebody is we might have somebody that we hire because they're known for getting stuff done and they just can plow through anything and get stuff done. They remove the obstacles. They literally just plow through and get it done. On the flip side, if you're building processes and you have various gates of things that need to get checked or governance or whatever, and you're trying to put that in place, that person is not going to do well in that space because they just plow through things. And so you have challenges getting that person to, navigate within the rules or the constraints of the process. It's a silly example, but it really is the same message in that we have to learn how to take our strengths and really use them to the best of our ability, but not let them sort of drive us crazy or everyone else around us crazy.
Well, it's not silly at all. I mean, I mentioned that I lead with the number seven, which means I only see the good, only see the positive. Now, that's a lovely way to live on some level. However, I can't tell you how many things I've missed along the
Yeah.
way, and how it's only in the last few years that I have really embraced pain in my life and allowed it to be and not made it wrong and push it away or deny it. Because when you, all illness is a denial of some kind of emotional pain. And so my body has taken its effect as a result. And so, we all there, it's joyful and it's wonderful to be a seven. It's also, hey, wait a minute, look what you're missing.
Yeah.
And the same thing with any one of the personality types. Every single person has that gift that is could be a challenge. When
Yeah.
you see your message, it's also to yourself.
Yes.
It's it's not just what you need to be teaching or being in the
Yeah.
world, but to take a look and say, and this is why it's such a gift of observation again. The to me, the number one thing we need to do is to become aware of our own patterns and how we're responding, not to make them wrong, but to simply allow ourselves to see, where we can. I don't like the thought of fixing ourselves. We're not trying to fix ourselves. We want to remember who we came here to be.
Well, I think that too, but again, I'm going to go back to the context of, my day job, and that I think the more self-aware you are, especially when you're, get more mature and you've got some experience behind you, it's not about fixing those spots that you get hung up in, but what it is about is knowing what are the people you need to surround yourself with, and knowing where your weaknesses or downfalls or whatever, where they lie, because you can fill those gaps with other strong people around you, or you can navigate to situations where your strengths show up more than those tough spots or weaknesses. Again, we all have them. We can't all be, excellent or, at every single thing. So the more you learn about yourself, the easier life gets to navigate into the spots where you can really shine and feel good about yourself. So I like to think of it that way. I think the knowledge is what helps you. It's not necessarily about fixing. Sometimes that you can fix things. Sometimes you need to work on things, but a lot of times it's just about learning to navigate better.
Yeah, exactly. And it's allowing the good to emerge,
Yeah.
and kind of like when we're focused, whatever we focus on increases in life. So if
Yeah.
we're focusing on what's going wrong, we're
Yeah.
going to get more of what's going wrong. So,
Yeah.
it's yeah, it just is a constant awareness of the good. I mean, here it
Yeah.
is again.
Let's talk about your six pillar system just a little bit. Because now that I've talked to you and you're saying, these six pillars that you focus on really grew out of your experience and where some of those struggles were, or some of your learning points. So, can you just give us a couple of examples of the areas of focus
Sure.
so that we sort of get a feel for what that looks like?
Yeah, and I have a little bit already, but it will start out. I usually start people on a process called fear to faith. And it's like when we face something that we're fearing, we can take a look at where we're focused. And that's where I help people focus on the quality they want to experience rather than what that fear is. But until you're naming the fear and feeling the fear, you don't know how to shift it. So there's a process we use called fear to faith. The second thing that we look at is I teach people about all the different kind of guidance out there and the joy guides. There's something called a runner guide. When you look something is lost, you say, "Hey, runner, go find it for me." We play a lot of games with that, and I help people to become aware of all the guidance that's out there, that's mostly it's within us. It's not like some separate thing, but we can look for it, like where are my keys? If you stop for a moment, you'll find them immediately, so we play with that one a lot. And then I mentioned the journaling, the type of journaling that lets people really look at the aspects of their life and the people that have been there and the experiences and the belief systems. And we do a 6 week. My program is not just coaching, it's training and coaching. It's a hybrid. And so we go deeply into learning how to do those journaling processes. Then we do the quantum living process that I mentioned about looking at like what's triggering you now and where that came from in your childhood. So that's a piece of it. Then I do a piece where I teach people the difference between visualization and visioning.
Mm.
Visualization says, I know what I want, I'm going to picture it and it'll show up, which is lovely. And then it shows up and say, why did I ask for that? That's not what I need. And so visioning is catching spirit's idea and really finding what it is we're being called to do. And so each of those, I actually, when I name them with the letter L for each of them. One is learning from life, living for the future. I mean, I play with words. And then the final one, all of the ones I've just talked about are programs that I took from other people and I now teach, and I'm certified in all of them. And then the final one is something that I created on my own, which is called Embracing the Aging Process.
Mm.
And it's looking at aging and dying, which is the biggest fear for
Yes.
most people. And we look at the myths around aging, and we also look at like, how do I want to be known when I'm gone?
Mm.
I wrote my eulogy, and the first thing I want someone to say is, we're gathered here today because we felt loved in Toni's presence.
I love that.
And it reminds me when I'm not doing that, I'm like,
Yes.
"Oh, if that's what I want said about me, how do I want to live?" So it's really a focus on how do I want to live. So it's actually a 6 month program for the first five, and then when people want to stay for the next, and they usually do, it goes 2 more months. We do the aging and death process. So it's a comprehensive program that I watch people transform before my eyes and just become more of who they truly are.
I love that. I love that. And it's such a gift to be able to give to other people, but also a gift to you to be able to see that play out. So, so cool. I want to ask you one more question before my final, and it's, I think I heard or I read or something about you talking about the law of attraction and how most people sort of miss the mark on understanding what it is. Does that ring a bell?
Not really. I do talk a little bit about the law of attraction, but I think people misunderstand the law of attraction and think it's just visualizing.
Yeah.
Just you can picture it, you can have it, and it really is about taking actions in our life. And maybe that's a piece here is that, like, people ask me, why do I need a coach? And I need a coach. I have a coach, and my coach keeps me accountable. And so that if these are what I want, um, she helps me see what's my next step and doesn't tell me what to do, but asks the right questions so that I
Yeah.
can then move forward. And to me, the law of attraction is one of the laws. It's not the only law of the universe. So it's an important one because all of life is vibration. And what we're thinking about, we're bringing about. So to me, this is why I keep saying to be aware of the centers. I'll go back to the very first thing we talked about, being aware of the three centers so we're not imbalanced. Many people will follow their gut, but they forget their heart and their head. Others follow their head and they forget their heart and their gut. So we want to learn we are all more dominant in one of those centers. And so we need to be aware of like how to balance them more completely in our lives.
Well, I guess that's a question, right? How do you? So in your example about the client you had and they were talking about moving and changing jobs, whatever, what if your head says it's the thing I should do, the financials line up, I wanted to be on the other coast, blah, blah, blah. So logically it makes sense. Your gut says don't do it because it hurts. It's tight. It's anxious about it. And those things are out of balance. Like, what do you do about that?
That's why that practice that I'm talking about is the three-centered practice to notice when they're all three in balance. And so it's not a 20-minute thing that says, all right, I have this decision to make. I'm going to figure out where it's coming from. It's a little bit more over time. And you start noticing when all three are in, like I've been doing that practice for a couple of years every day. I wake up and that's the first thing I do. So I'm used to listening to all three centers coming together. So when I'm making a decision, it can be pretty quick. You want to learn how to put those three in balance because the stomach pain may be saying this is not the right thing to do, or it may just be old messages.
Yes.
Which is why I have all those 6 pillars and not just one.
To work through that.
Things you've got to work through, the beliefs that are there, the feelings that are there, the messages.
Yeah, that's fair.
I wish I had a magic wand that I could.
Don't we all? Don't we all?
It's a process. And again, that's why, when people say, oh my God, a 6-month program, well, 6 months of your life is nothing compared to, and the people who get it look at me and say, oh God, I want this so badly.
Yeah, well, then you walk away with those abilities. You have the capabilities to then put it into practice as a integrated way of living. So definitely. Yeah, that makes sense. Definitely. Well, I'm going to ask you the question I always like to wrap up with, and that is, if someone's listening and they only can take away one soundbite, and you may have already said it, but what would you say? What's the message you would want them to walk away with?
The one that just keeps haunting me is life is for me. It's not happening to me. It's happening for me. To me, that's one of the major things that people get wrong. They blame other people. They're looking to change circumstances rather than looking within. And so it's like nothing on the outside is causing what I'm feeling or thinking or doing. It's all an inside job.
Love it. So, and where is the best place for folks to find you?
Easiest thing is look at the spelling of my name, ToniLamotta.com. And I have a free gift when people sign up for my email list that actually gives you a little quiz to find out how good your inner compass actually is.
Love that.
And then obviously, if you want to stay on the mailing list, you'll hear all kinds of opportunities to come and work with me.
And we'll put that link in the show notes for folks as well. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah, I've loved it too. Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode of Message in the Middle. I hope you found something in this conversation that reminded you that you're not alone and that midlife isn't about winding down. It's about waking up. You're not done. You're just becoming. If this episode speaks to you at all, please share it with a friend who needs to hear it. And if you're enjoying the show, I'd be so grateful if you could take a moment to leave a review. It really helps other women find this community and this podcast. Until next time, take care of yourself.